Does government deliver?
Speed, convenience, price. It's a package only we can deliver.
Please. Government claims it delivered.
The train is now arriving.
The train has arrived indeed.
But in reality,
we do have passenger trains, and they're hemorrhaging money.
Hemorrhaging your money.
Should government be doing this at all? And frequently the answer is no.
No. To taxpayers paying police officers to work for their union.
We have no idea what these people are doing, except we know what they're not doing, which is what they were hired to do.
Even defense, which government's supposed to do, is riddled with waste. And the Postal Service can't even close little-used post offices.
No question, if this were private enterprise, many would be closed.
This governor closed parts of government.
The fruit hangs pretty low in government, John.
And yet people in government...
You, me, genius!
...think they're geniuses?
Genius!
Government Incorporated. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Government Incorporated. That's what we call tonight's show, but what does that mean? Well, it means government doing things the private sector ought to do. Things like managing health care, banking, transportation, the mail. These things happen better, faster, and cheaper if government steps aside and lets greedy competitors compete to do it. We see that again and again in real life. The post office couldn't get it there overnight. They'd bring in all these managers, these experts from the private sector, and they still couldn't. But then FedEx happened and United Parcel Service. Suddenly they could. Now even the post office does it sometimes. But the private sector does everything better. I'll give you $1,000 if you can name one thing that government does more efficiently. We need government to do some things, so I'm just talking more efficiently. There's nothing. But even though the private sector is more efficient, politicians and bureaucrats usually won't let go. They want their tentacles on everything. And the public's usually happy to go along because we're imprinted to believe that the specialists in Washington and state capitals know better. They're from the government. They're here to help. And they're so smart. But think about what governments did when they decided they should build cars. This is what you get. The Trabant, the pride of the Eastern Bloc. It was a terrible car, hard to drive, and it spewed pollution. But the central planners said it was great.
Bequem für 4 Erwachsene. Wendig. Schnell.
Once the Berlin Wall went down and the Trabant had private sector competition, it disappeared. People prefer Toyotas and Fords. However,
when government runs things, this is what we get. It's what we often get from government. Lousy products and services that cost a lot. We need some government, but not so much that it's bankrupting us. And tonight's first guest works for government. He's a governor, but he says you'd be surprised at how much government you'll never miss. He's Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels. So what won't we miss?
Oh, John, there's a lot. You won't miss a lot of the real estate government owns. You won't miss things like vehicles and planes, which they tend to accumulate. You won't miss the lousy service. We always called it the Yellow Pages test. If it's in there, then conceivably government shouldn't be doing it itself.
If it's in the Yellow Pages and there are more than a couple competitors offering it, you say government shouldn't do it.
It should at least ask the question, if somebody's doing this all day, every day, maybe they're better at it. And of course, as you say, they have the incentive to get better, because if they don't, they go out of business, which government can't do.
But they just want money. They're just greedy. You're a public servant. You're doing it for the people.
John, I love the sarcasm, but you're putting your finger on a real question.
Well, people feel that way.
Well, yes, but there's a certain another form of greed that's every bit as insidious than the human tendency to try to get ahead and make money, and that's the greed for power over other people, and that's a constant danger in government that needs to be guarded against.
All right, you mentioned the property that government keeps holding on to. You leased some property in Indiana, the toll road. Tell us about that.
Yes, we had a toll road losing money, run as a political patronage operation for 50 years, still hadn't paid off its bonds.
Patronage meaning I'm running the highway, I'm going to hire my friends, my supporters.
Yes. And so we found a way to harvest some money we never would have had, and we're building billions of dollars of roads that have no taxes, no interest or borrowing cost. And meanwhile, we got the best toll road we've ever had.
But you leased it to a foreign company, and you really had to work to sell that. You had to convince people. You really fought for it. Here's a clip of that.
This is the test. This is the time. There is no other way. There is no other plan, and there isn't going to be. You're either for this bill or you're against our future.
You were on fire then. That I've never seen you that passionate. You really sold that. You've calmed down since.
Oh, I get fired up when I think that the future of our state's at stake. It was then. And it was simply a better use of an asset that in government's hands was underperforming.
But why would it be better? Here's Indiana running the toll road for the people versus a private company, a foreign company, looking to make money for its shareholders. They're that much more efficient?
Well, John, you know, we Americans distrust bigness in business, labor, and government for a good reason. We don't permit monopolies. We've gotten rid of just about all of them, except government itself. And why do we not like monopolies? Because they overcharge and underserve their customers. They have no incentive not to. The people running that road now had every incentive to put in electronic tolling, to build more lanes for less congestion, and to run
keep
it.
Traffic moving faster because they make more money when it's moving.
They run
faster.
a lousy road, people will drive on some other road, find a way around it. So they have a very positive incentive to do what the state wasn't very good at doing.
Even after you won the vote, it wasn't popular with the people. 60% on one poll said a toll road's a bad idea. We're going to let a private company collect the tolls. But today, the result?
The result is we're repairing bridges, building roads. We're the only state with a building boom in infrastructure, and it didn't cost the taxpayers a nickel.
One other controversial thing you did, this one just this year, you signed a right-to-work bill. What does right-to-work mean?
All it really means is that it's the worker's decision whether or not to pay the dues. You can't be forced to pay dues as a
union dues.
Union dues, sorry, as a condition of work.
I was forced to join a union to work at ABC. New York is a forced union state, and this place, fortunately, is non-union. I don't have to, but I didn't like not having the choice. I would think that would be popular with people.
It is. About 70+% of the folks in our state thought that was fair and right. But I'll tell you what.
You didn't push it for a long time.
Well, we had to. First of all, we had to see a real opening to do it, and it didn't arrive till last year. But I'll tell you, the main point about right to work for us gets back to what I think government should always have as its very first priority. That's the creation of opportunity for people. If it does its job well, it creates the conditions whereby men and women of enterprise create wealth for each other. We thought to continue Indiana's climb up the list of the very, very best places for jobs and investment, right to work made sense.
I would think that right to work is just a stronger cause than the no collective bargaining fight that happened in Wisconsin, with so much Sturm und Drang. I mean, you're saying non-union members should not be prevented from having a job. So it was odd to hear protesters saying no right to work. Take a listen.
No right to work! Union opponents to right to work continued their chanting,
fighting to send a message to these arrogant people that think that they could tell us how to live, where to live, and what kind of living we can have.
So he's calling you arrogant, but I would think it's the union who's saying what kind of living you can have if you're forced to join.
Well, I understood that it was going to be a very emotional matter, particularly for those who are very committed to the union movement. Compulsory dues has been a cardinal principle, but
then there's no free riding. If you have to join the union,
and I understand that argument. But in Indiana, we had gotten to the point where we were winning about 90% of the time when businesses were comparing more than one state, but we were being blocked from about a third of the opportunities because about 1 in 3 businesses we're only going to go to a right-to-work state. And so we had to take that barrier down. And by the way, as soon as we did, there had been a flood of businesses who wouldn't talk to us before.
And you are sort of alone. Let's put that map up that shows right-to-work states, and that all the states around Indiana are forced union states. All those businesses must be now saying, hey, it's a little island of freedom here.
We think we've been an island of very pro-growth policies in general, and this is just one more.
You cut government jobs by 21% since you took office.
We have the fewest state employees per capita in the country, and we have the fewest our state has had since 1975.
You were $78 million in debt. Now you have a $1.5 billion surplus.
We just simply slowed down the rate of spending to about half the rate of inflation. We've been there 7 years, and the compound rate of spending is well under the rate of inflation.
So you don't even have to make a cut. You just have to slow the growth.
Yes, and you know, the fruit hangs pretty low in government, John. That was certainly our experience.
You've also passed a school choice bill. Congratulations on that. But I want to just give you some pushback. You've got the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. This sounds like crapitalism, crony capitalism, a scam where you get to say, okay, this company will give you a special break to come here. Why not get rid of these development companies and just lower the rules and taxes for everybody?
Well, first of all, that corporation that you're asking about, we never give out any cash, as some states do, and we measure them based on how inexpensively. All we ever do is give conditional incentives. No jobs and investment, no incentives.
Like a tax break?
Temporary tax relief.
But why have them at all? Why not just lower taxes for everybody? You have to do this to compete?
Often you don't. But I will say I see a lot of other states doing things differently. It's very dangerous to give a politician a checkbook and say, do anything you want to bring jobs to our state, because their incentive is to cut the ribbon. They can be gone, to the next job when the bill comes due. We don't do that in Indiana, and we're finding you can win without doing so.
Well, thank you, Governor Daniels. Indiana is now rated number 3 in the country on most free state economy, which is a big improvement. You're not quite up there with New Hampshire and South Dakota, but
we're gaining on them.
Thank you, Governor Daniels. Coming up, what if we got the government out of other businesses like housing, Amtrack, and the post office? Wouldn't that be great? We'll look at how that might work next. Do you ever go to the post office's website? Okay, you probably don't. We do, so you don't have to. The website says, since Ben Franklin was appointed our first Postmaster General, the Postal Service has grown and changed with America. It sounds so patriotic. And part of it's true. The post office has grown and grown so much it loses billions of your tax dollars now. The changed with America part, not so much. The post office is another government monopoly, and government monopolies don't change or innovate the way private businesses do. Of course, doesn't the post office have to be a government monopoly? Running the post office is in the Constitution. But actually, the Constitution just says Congress shall have the power to establish post offices. It doesn't say that government must deliver the mail. Since government's lousy at doing everything, why, when America's going broke, are we still losing money in the mail business? Well, let's ask a member of the Post Office Board of Governors, Mickey Barnett. Mickey, you've been on the board 6 years trying to stem the losses. Why are we still losing money? Billions of dollars.
2 points. One, no taxpayer dollars have been lost. There are no tax funds go to the Postal Service.
Where do you get the money to cover the losses?
Services. It's when you pay postage stamps, buy postage, that's where we get it. Now, we do have a loss, and ultimately the taxpayer could be at risk. So the question's correct. Innovation has been a hallmark of what's been done the last 5 years. In the last 10 years, we've reduced the workforce by 250,000 workers, primarily through innovation. This is a business. It's not a tax-run industry.
Well, if it's a business, you would fire some workers if there wasn't enough work for them, and you never do that.
Granted, we are like a government in the sense that we want to be compassionate and do it through attrition. And one of the main problems we have is very limited flexibility. Congress has tied our hands. The Board of Governors would and has come up with a plan to profitability where the taxpayers will never be on the hook for a penny and we will remain profitable.
By doing things like?
Like barcoding all everything. First time it touches a human hand is when it's delivered.
Closing some small post offices?
One of our problems, we're not, Congress controls us to a great extent, which is why we're a quasi-governmental agency, not a private enterprise. No question, if this were private enterprise, we have 36,000 post offices, many would be closed.
You want to do more, but what's the obstacle? Why do you say Congress is an
delivery
obstacle?
schedules, for example. It's in statute every year we must deliver 6 days a week.
And congressmen all defend their individual post office and their little district?
They do, and
mostly Republicans, you told us on the phone?
Well, many Republicans. John, you would be surprised. This year, we're very close to breaking even on an operational standpoint.
Close to breaking even.
No,
it's not the same as breaking even or making a profit, which is what businesses
We made a profit
do.
through 2006. All right, the last year. That's when the volume of mail dropped precipitously. There has been a 50% decline in single-piece first-class mail in the last 10 years.
So get the government out of the business. Why not privatize?
There's no one going to buy the Postal Service that's mandated to go everywhere in this country. It would not happen.
Just sell it, and if you live way the heck out, you have to come into the local 7-Eleven to get your mail. That's life.
If Congress chose to do that, that would be an answer.
Congress won't allow that?
No, they will not allow that, and I don't think the public would allow that. We want to operate like a business.
But you don't operate like a business.
We will operate like a business if Congress will let us.
But Congress won't let you.
They may. Their bill just passed the Senate. It had a couple of good things in it, many bad things. The House is considering legislation.
But this has gone on for years and years, and each congressman wants to keep your local post office.
On all the parts that we have flexibility and control over, we are making it a profitable enterprise. We do need more flexibility. We need more flexibility in everything. We have a new product we want to market. It takes 8 months to get approval through the PRC and other things.
What's the PRC?
The Public Postal Regulatory Commission. We're treated like a utility. 8 months. Well, and it can be more or less, but yeah. For example,
no wonder you can't compete. So sell it off. Sweden.
No one will buy it. There's just be no bidders for it. Look, if it fits,
in Holland,
it
they're making. Lots of people offered to buy the post office in Holland. It's making money.
I'm no expert on Holland, but I believe you'll find the facts are 90% of the post offices were closed, and the public is extremely dissatisfied with the service.
Maybe that's what we need.
I don't know all the facts in Holland.
Maybe we need to close a bunch of post offices and move to 7-Eleven.
But that's not my decision. That's Congress's. I don't disagree that things need to be run more like a business. We're trying to do that.
Sweden allowed private sector competition. Prices fell. In America, I'm breaking the law if I put something in a mail slot. I can't even compete with you.
But you could put in your own mail slot. You could put a mailbox right next to it. Newspapers all over America put in their own.
Why do I have to put a separate mailbox?
Primarily because of security. If anybody could use it, it loses all aspects of the federal security of a mailbox.
Well, this is why I would say we need private sector competition, because when you talk to the government people about cutting back, they always have a reason why we need 2 mail slots in this case. Thank you, Mickey Barnett, for coming in. On the subject of money-losing government monopolies, how about Amtrack? Do you know how much you pay to subsidize trains that rich people ride? We'll tell you. Another part of our massive government incorporated is Amtrack, our government railroad. It was created 40 years ago after a senator said a government rail company would be the last great hope to save rail passenger service. So how's that working out for us? Randall O'Toole of the Cato Institute specializes in transportation. How's it worked out for us? We still have passenger trains.
We do have passenger trains, and they're hemorrhaging money. When Amtrak took over, the Congress actually believed that it would be able to pay for itself out of rail fares. And at the time, rail fares were cheaper than airline fares. So they thought they'd get a lot of customers. But since then, airline fares have dropped dramatically. Rail fares have gone up. And the costs of running Amtrak have gone up even faster, so the subsidies are huge. And
well, let's break this down. They
Okay.
thought that the costs would go down because costs often do, and they thought they could manage it better. Government always thinks that. Could make the same argument for government health care. But they didn't regulate freight rail. And there we have this chart. The prices did go down. If we measure this from the beginning of Amtrak prices went up, freight went down.
And if you look at the chart, you notice that they stayed about the same until about 1980 when we deregulated the freight lines. We got the government out of regulating the freight lines, and then freight went way down. But with government regulation on Amtrak, Congress imposed telling Amtrak how they have to manage their labor and where they have to run trains, the cost just went up.
And one result is that they run trains from New Orleans to Los Angeles, for example. That's the most expensive subsidy. You've ridden this train.
I've ridden this train. It goes through a desolate landscape. It takes a long time, and it only goes 3 days a week, and it has the lowest ridership of any major Amtrak train and some of the highest costs.
So get rid of it.
Get rid of it, except for there are politicians whose district it passes through who want to keep that train going.
So the result is the ticket price is $452. So this is a train ride for rich people. You can fly there much more cheaply, take the bus much more cheaply. Plus, the taxpayer pays a subsidy of $437 a ticket.
It's 4 times as great as flying.
Now, the government lovers would say, well, private transportation gets a subsidy too. The taxpayer makes a contribution to flying and driving.
There are subsidies to flying, but those subsidies do average to about a penny a passenger mile as opposed to 27 cents a passenger mile for Amtrak.
So why don't they privatize Amtrak?
Well, they privatized railroads in other countries. Japan privatized its railroads, and they're now making a profit. Britain privatized its railroads, and while they do get some subsidies, for the most part, they're being very innovative, and they're attracting more passengers faster than European railroads.
And making a profit.
And making a profit. And if we privatized the passenger trains here, I think we would get some passenger trains that would be much better than Amtrak. We might get fewer passenger trains. But the irony is that Anthony Haswell, who's called the father of Amtrak because he originally proposed to create Amtrak back in the 1960s, now believes it was a mistake and thinks we ought to privatize it. Politicians want to hang on. Politicians want to control so that they can claim that the reason why you have a passenger train to ride is because you elected them and you need to vote for them again.
Another of their arguments is that trains are green. It's not like the cars which pollute. The train is clean.
Well, trains, most Amtrak trains use diesel locomotives, and they use the same kind of fuel that our cars and trucks use, and they pollute. They use a little bit less energy than the average automobile today, but automobiles are getting more fuel efficient, much faster than trains.
And the bus?
The bus is the greenest of all. The bus uses about a third as much energy and emits about a third as much pollution as Amtrak for intercity buses. And it's not just green. There are bus routes all over the country where the local bus companies are providing faster, more frequent service at far lower fares than the competing Amtrak trains that are government subsidized.
But the politicians don't find that glamorous, and they don't control it, so they're not as thrilled with buses. Last point, a criticism, in case our viewers are skeptical about him. This is from a transportation blogger who likes big government. The interstate highway system is perhaps the single biggest government intervention in the economy. Reading O'Toole, that's you, you'd think it was a wonder of the free market.
Well, the interstate highway system worked. It was a government program that did work, and it worked because Congress said, first of all, it's going to be funded by the users. We're not going to have general taxpayers funded. It's going to be funded out of gas taxes and other taxes on the users. And second of all, we're only going to build it as the money comes in. We aren't going to borrow a wad of money and then build it and hope the money comes in. If we had designed Amtrak the way we designed the interstate highway system, where we put it on a pay-as-you-go basis, it might have worked. But we didn't. We decided to have the government fund it, and that actually was the problem. Too much money is the problem.
Well, I ride Amtrak to Washington. I thank you for your subsidy. I don't deserve it, but I get it. Thank you, Randall O'Toole.
I ride Megabus to Washington.
Oh, good for you. Thank you for fighting against these subsidies. Coming up, a much bigger part of government incorporated, defense. Now, defense is something government is supposed to do.
But did you know that the Defense Department's brownie recipe is 26 pages long? Why would defense be any more efficient than anything else government does? I complain about big government, but defense is something government's supposed to do. But what is defense and what is empire building? Does America need to spend almost as much on our military as all the nations in the world combined? Yes, says former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. In fact, he says we should spend more. No, says Congressman Dennis Kucinich. He says President Eisenhower was right to warn about a military-industrial complex that has too much influence. Congressman, what do you mean too much influence?
Well, by that I mean that if you look at the cost of the military, they're taking a greater and greater part of our GDP, and we need to understand
that's not true. It's a greater amount, not a greater part of our GDP.
Well, they're taking an increasing amount of our GDP since 9/11. It's about 3.5%, I believe it is, and I think that we need to be aware. The economic effect of that is it inevitably slows employment. It causes diversion of resources to things that would be beneficial to the economy. It's a loser in economic terms, and it's not clear that it actually makes America safer.
Ambassador Bolton, I guess that's the big question. How much safer does this make us?
Well, I think you have to look at the divergent threats that the United States faces around the world, the continuing threat of terrorism, the continuing very real threat of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological, the increasing assertiveness, in some cases near belligerency of China.
Those are real threats, but I think back to the past when Russia had all those missiles aimed at us. We now spend more, inflation adjusted, than at the height of the Cold War, or during the Reagan buildup, or the Vietnam War, or the Korean War.
Well, if you add in the cost of the current conflict in Afghanistan, that might be right. But defense spending as a percentage of GNP has consistently been going down since the days of the Cold War. And in fact, even the Obama administration's Secretary of Defense has said if the cuts required by sequestration take effect, it will have a devastating effect on our defense.
But they always say that in government. Any cut is devastating. Congressman, I'll give you a shot on that.
Well, the fact of the matter is, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the wars, according to Joseph Stiglitz and Linda Bilmes, could cost $5 trillion when all the costs are added up. We went into wars of choice here, which have hurt our economy. In addition to that, it hasn't made us safer. Now, I respect Ambassador Bolton because I know he really wants America to be safe. So do I. The question is, are we safe if we are the policemen of the world? Do we have the resources to keep doing that? And, well, other nations, such as China, are investing in the growth of their economy.
Ambassador Bolton, I know you think we are safer because we police the world to some extent. But economically, how can we afford this when we're going broke?
We're not out policing in the world in the sense of engaging in activity purely for munificent intent. What we're trying to do here is protect American interest and the interest of our trading partners. If we provide some small measure of stability in the world, it has an enormous benefit for the American economy. And if we don't provide it, if we don't protect the sea lines of communication, if we don't ensure stability for our friends and allies, then I think the entire economic picture for the United States darkens considerably.
But it's like the spending's on automatic pilot. Every year, the Army gets a third.
It is absolutely not. It is absolutely not on automatic pilot. We can see in the upcoming battle over sequestration that dramatic cuts are going to occur that almost no one in the Republican Party wants, and probably a majority of the Democratic Party don't want. That hardly constitutes automatic pilot unless you mean down.
Well, the Washington Post headlined, Obama cuts defense to the bone and then some. So there's a lot of talk about that, but we have this inflation-adjusted chart that shows what will really happen. Obama's plan is for it to only fall slightly and then flatten out. How is that cutting to the bone?
You know, any plan for budgets that goes beyond about 3 years is nothing but fantasy, and I think everybody understands it. What we're talking about in the very near term, however, are cuts in procurement, in personnel, in training that will have a devastating effect for years to come. And if you don't believe it, look what happens in the next several months as defense contractors announce layoffs in the hundreds of thousands. Talk about loss of jobs.
When I say automatic pilot, I'm thinking about how the Navy and the Marines get 29%, the Air Force 27%, the Army 26%. It's about the same every year. It's like nobody's really making hard choices.
Look, if you don't think that between the services there isn't vigorous debate over what the budget amounts ought to be, then I'd invite you to go to the Pentagon for a couple of weeks. The amounts may stay the same, but it reflects a judgment of where the threats are. I think obviously this has to be evaluated on an annual basis. We need to look constantly at whether our priorities are right. But I tell you, in a world of increasing uncertainty, that argues for more capabilities in our national defense, not fewer.
Congressman, I think most people are on John Bolton's side on this. The outcry over any cuts, you're a minority here.
The fact of the matter is we've made choices, wars of choices, that have put us at an economic disadvantage. It is actually slowing economic growth. It is actually reducing employment. It's a loser. It's a loss of jobs, a loss of GDP, a loss in our trade. And I'm looking at it from an economic standpoint, from a security standpoint. I don't know that America's more safe today with America looming, racing over the globe looking for giants to slay.
Ambassador, he called these wars of choice, and you said on my show that I was one of those blame America people for saying that these are wars of choice and they create new terrorists who want to kill us. I'm wrong.
You are wrong, and they're not wars of choice. The issue is how you best defend America. And in the case of overthrowing Taliban and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, we made the world safer. We made America safer. And overthrowing Saddam Hussein, we did the same. Look, I'm happy to put defense spending to an economic test and argue strongly for the proposition that if we don't have a visible and important American presence around the world protecting the stability of international commerce, communication, and finance, we will not have sustained American prosperity at home.
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton and Congressman Kucinich. Coming up, did you know that your tax dollars meant for the police go instead to pay for full-time union work? We libertarians complain about governments trying to do too much. But one thing governments should do is keep us safe. I'm happy to pay taxes for national defense, for my local police department. I know some of it's wasted, but until recently, I didn't know how much. You probably don't know that your local taxes sometimes go to pay people who do nothing but work for their unions. I learned about that from Clint Bolick of the Libertarian Goldwater Institute, who just won an injunction against this practice in Arizona. So what's the practice?
It's called release time, and it's literally that. Officers are released from their police work to do union work full time. It's one of the big hidden scams in America.
So it's in the union contract for the police that you got to pay us not to patrol streets, but also to do union work.
Right. To lobby, to negotiate against the city for its pay increases, to ask for pension increases, to do union recruiting, you name it. Anything except patrolling the streets and keeping us safe.
And in Phoenix, there are several, where you are, there are several people who don't do any street patrols. They just do full-time union work?
That's right. There's 6 full-time police officers who do nothing but union work, and over 2,000 hours a year allocated for others to do the same.
How much union work can there be?
Well, there's no end to it, John.
It's kind of like a slush fund, then. They can do with this work whatever they want.
It is a total slush fund. It amounts to $1 million a year.
In Phoenix, taxpayers pay almost $4 million for 73,000 hours of union release time.
That's absolutely right. And And we have no idea what these people are doing, except we know what they're not doing, which is what they were hired to do.
All right. The national president of the American Federation of Government Employees, John Gage, says gains in quality, productivity, efficiency, year after year, department after department, simply would not have been possible without the reasonable and sound use of official time.
Well, I got to say, there are some bureaucrats who are probably better off not not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But when you look at cops in particular, every hour diverted away from law enforcement is a serious lost hour. There are people getting killed out there, getting robbed, and these folks are riding a union desk and earning the same pensions, John, as the people who are actually risking their lives every day.
And so the judge in Arizona says, you've got a point. You've won the first round.
That's right.
But you're the first person really to challenge this. This goes on all over the country. It's still going on most
It does. And what we're hoping, you know, the unions do not publicize this, nor do the government officials who sign their names on these contracts. It would be embarrassing to say we're paying them to not work.
Not just not work, but to argue against the taxpayer.
That's right. In Arizona, they are paid to negotiate their own contracts. They're paid to lobby for bills that sometimes the city takes the opposite position on. It's absolutely absurd.
Paying police officers not to do police work. Thank you, Clint Bolick of the Goldwater Institute. Coming up, my take on Government Incorporated. Government Inc. That's a confusing title for this show. I chose it because the word incorporated implies big, powerful, probably growing bigger. Government's definitely that. But Inc. really means a corporation. People fear corporations and think they're too big, but no corporation is as big as government. A lefty activist once said to me, "Why do you libertarians worry so much about government power? Why not corporate power?" My answer was simple. Government can use force. That's key. Companies can't. No company can force me to buy its products. Walmart, no matter how big it gets, must compete for my money. I can fire Walmart simply by crossing the street, going to another business. But we have just one federal government. We can't fire it without leaving our country. Okay, at election time, we can fire the leaders of our government. But I just have one vote out of millions, and when my guys lose, which they usually do, I must obey the commands of the majority that won. And elections only happen once every 2, 4, 6 years. Companies, by contrast, face elections every second. We vote with our dollar bills. If Walmart doesn't constantly struggle to serve us better than Kmart or Target or Wawa, Walmart loses our votes and shrinks, maybe goes out of business. Governments almost never shrink. This is why those evil corporations do things better than government. Recently, MSNBC deceitfully edited Mitt Romney's comments about a sandwich-making machine at Wawa.
I was at Wawa's. I wanted to order a sandwich. You press a little touch-tone keypad, all right? You just touch that, and, you know, the sandwich comes out. You touch this, touch this, touch this. Go pay the cashier. There's your sandwich. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
She's laughing because Romney called Wawa Wawas. So what? What is relevant is that Wawa does have a computerized way to order sandwiches that's fast and easy. Then they sell you a sandwich for less than $4. That is amazing. Government couldn't do that. Or if it could, it would cost more, and they'd give you a sandwich you didn't want. Sometimes I wish the Soviet Union were still around to warn people about that. As I said to Governor Daniels, the communist world produced all kinds of products that they said were great, like this car, the East German Trabant. It was a terrible car. You had to put the oil and gas in separately and then shake the car to mix them. The car spews pollution. A man in Indiana happens to like collecting this terrible car.
Since there's no gas gauge, this is checking the fuel.
He owns 6.
When government runs things, this is what we get.
That's why I wrote, No, They Can't. Government fails, but individuals succeed. And groups of individuals in the form of private, profit-seeking corporations do everything better. Politicians promise that they solve problems, but they usually can't. For years, the post office tried, but couldn't get it there overnight. Then government allowed private companies to compete. Individuals invented FedEx and UPS. They could get it there overnight and make a profit. Taxpayer-subsidized Amtrack loses billions of your dollars, but privately run transit like the Megabus and the New York Waterway are profitable because they have to be. Yet despite the failures of government Inc. and transit, mail delivery, even the military, and everything it touches, government keeps growing. The feds now employ more than 2 million people. For every 100 workers in the private sector, America once had 1 government worker. Now we have 16, almost as bad as Greece, which has 20. That's a big reason Greece is broke and why they have riots when people propose cutting the size of their bloated government. We are on the road to Greece if we don't stop the growth and let the private sector bloom. Although this is an election year and politics is all the mainstream media talk about, we should celebrate the private sector. It's what brings us the best of life. That's our show. We'll have a new show next week on Thursday, 9 p.m. on the Fox Business Network. Thanks for watching.